Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Surefire Damon, and welcome to the video. So I'm pretty sure you guys can guess from both the thumbnail as well as the title, we're going to be going over the Norse mythology today. If you guys do like the video though, don't forget to leave a like, don't forget to subscribe, and just check out the other lore videos once they come out. So like I said, as we're going over the Norse mythology, this can also be called the Nordic Germanic mythology. Now, this mythology stems from Norse paganism, but was later switched over to Scandinavian folklore after the Christianization of Scandinavia. Now, as saying this, the place of origins for this mythology come from the countries of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, or just simply Scandinavia. But we might as well mention them anyway, just because we're going to give them a little bit of credit. Now, even with the Scandinavian area being the place of origin, we can actually look at the Norse mythology and see that it was mostly inspired by 13th century poems and tales from Iceland, of all places. That being said, there is actually a collection of 13th century Icelandic poems that is collected into the book The Poetic Edda. While this has no actual author and was just collected anonymously, this would later go on to inspire the Prose Edda. Now, the Prose Edda is actually a collection of 3 smaller books that cover the actual Norse mythology through different tales of them. While I'm not going to go ahead and read the actual names of these books or the author, I'm going to leave them on the screen because I am afraid of butchering their names to complete hell. So, enjoy that. Now, as with any mythology, or really any piece of literature that has an expanded universe, there's a plentiful amount of important beings, races, and whatnot inside of this. But I'm going to go ahead and give you guys as brief of a description as I can of them, as well as some examples, so that way we can at least get a general idea of who and what they are. So starting out, we have the Aesir, or the Aesir and the Aesir, which were the god and goddesses of the Norse mythology. I'm not sure why exactly there's a distinction between the two, as I'll explain this a little bit later, but there is, the Aesir and the Aesir, so just take that as you will. Examples for them, though, consist of Odin, Thor, Loki, Tyr, Frigg, and Idun. After this, we have the Vanir, which is actually another tribe of gods that came from a place called Vanaheim. There's only really 3 named ones, though, but one of these names is going to pop out really instantly for you guys. Those names, though, are Njörd, Freyr, and Freya. I'll go ahead and explain Freya's whole thing on this when I cover her video, but just know she was not originally an Aesir, or I guess technically an Aesir, but was rather a Vanir. Next we have the Jotuns. Now, the Jotuns were giants and giantesses in this realm, and oddly enough, as reading descriptions about them, they're not always actually just stupidly tall beings. Truth be told, that's just the fact that they were called Jotuns only because they came from the realm of Jotunheim. Nothing more. That being said, though, some examples of this are the actual ice giant Ymir, a Jotun named Hel, and the Jotun Skadi. After this, we're going to go ahead and cover the dwarves, or dark elves as they're called. Only real notable one that I'm going to go ahead and mention, though, just because he's actually in the game, is Fafnir. But there are still a bit other more well-known ones as well, so those can always be covered later in another video if you guys really want. After this, we have the Valkyries, who I'll probably end up talking when I talk about with Freya anyway. But a good one is going to be Skuld, as she has actually appeared in a couple of different games, including the mobile game Valkyrie Connect. So if you ever really want to know a little bit about her, go ahead and play that game. Or not. I honestly don't blame you. Next we have the humans, which, while there were plenty of examples for me to choose from, I went ahead and chose Sol and Mani, only because Sol is actually in the game. Now, Sol, as we know, even though she looks like a being of fire, is still human and does in fact carry the sun, while her brother Mani, in turn, carries the moon. Coming next, we have animals, which I don't really believe I need to give a description for you guys, because honestly, if you don't know what an animal is, I have questions for you. But just to give you some examples, just because I know people will know these guys, we have, of course, my main, Fenrir, and his brother, Jormungand, who, oddly enough, is a serpent. I don't know how Loki came to have a serpent child, as well as a wolf. The Jotun is the only one that makes sense, and that was Hel. But whatever, he had sex with a horse, so I'm not getting into this. Now, the last race of beings I wanted to cover were the elves, and the reason why I'm covering them last is because there isn't a single named one in this mythology, and I cannot honestly understand why. Now, the elves are mentioned, they're mentioned in passing, but other than that, they're kind of forgotten. So, fuck it, they just exist to be pretty. And that's it. Fucking elves. Alright, now going into the cosmology of this, mythology. So many ologies. We're gonna go ahead and cover the main realms of importance, which would be Yggdrasil and the 9 worlds, and then the afterlife. Pretty straightforward. Now, as stated, we're just gonna go ahead and cover Yggdrasil and the 9 worlds real quick. So Yggdrasil is a spiritual tree that actually connects Asgard to the 9 worlds. As such, that's because it sprouted from Asgard originally. There are a couple of beings that do live on it, or I guess technically a few, and that would be an unnamed eagle all the way at the top, and a dragon named Nidog all the way at the bottom. Plus a couple of stags that actually live on it as well. And if you really want to consider him, I guess, Ratatoskr, but he basically just travels the tree, and I'm going to assume he lives in Asgard, but I guess we'll figure out more once we actually cover his video. Anyway, so onto that eagle and the dragon. There's no real reason why they're there, truth be told. So I'm going to assume they just decided to chill there and all was good, even though they hate each other. And Ratatoskr is an asshole, because he keeps making them hate each other even more. But whatever, no one likes him anyway. Following this, we have Midgard, which is apparently the only actual physical world. But that's basically just Earth, so I don't really feel the need to cover it, because if you really want a description, go ahead and look outside. Boom. Well, I guess technically if we're going to be more honest in how it actually looked geographically, you should probably look at the Scandinavian area, because I can only imagine that's how they imagined Midgard looking. With this, we'll go ahead and cover Asgard, which was the world of the gods, and was connected to Midgard through a rainbow bridge named Bifrost, or Bifrost. This was supposed to be the ultimate world of Inigard, which was basically a civilized world. While I couldn't really figure out too much about how Asgard really is, all that's really noted is that it's a civilized world where the gods live. So, oh, and apparently it's their fortress. Take that as you will. Now, if you guys have seen Thor, Marvel's Thor movie, that's probably a good way of, getting at least an idea of what it's like. But you can also look at artist renditions of them as well, which you could really do with all these places, but Next we have Jotunheim, which was the world of the Jotuns, who would have guessed. Now this terrain was rocky and unfertile, even though it apparently was covered with dense forest, so I see that as an idiom, but whatever, we're not going to go ahead and cover that. As well as this, though, it was apparently made from the corpse of Ymir. Now this world was supposed to be the ultimate model of Antigard, or basically the wilds. So it was a really good opposite to Asgard. Now the last important world I really want to mention, just because of its significance in Ragnarok, is going to be Helheim, which was the world of the dead and ruled by the goddess Hel. Now Helheim is also known as Hel, but for the sake of whenever I talk about Helheim and Hel, obviously the goddess will just be referred to as Hel, and the other location will be Helheim. But I'll go ahead and refer to it as Helheim for the rest of the video, just because I'm not going to speak about the goddess for any point now, so cool. Now, as you would imagine for a place called Hell, that's where the dead go, but it's really not mentioned often, like, for a description, other than the fact that we know it's an underworld, like, an underground world. But that's really about it. In fact, a lot of the people that usually do describe Hell, describe it in pretty neutral or even positive terms. But I'll go ahead and cover Helheim a little bit more once I actually talk about the afterlife. Now, these next two places, I wanted to talk about them in conjunction, just because of how significant they are, sort of. That would be Niflheim and Muspelheim, or the primordial worlds of ice and fire. Really, though, the only major importance for Niflheim is the fact that this was the home of the ice giants, or Ymir. And the importance of Muspelheim is it was the land of fire giants. That's really all I could say. I mean, there is a very somewhat important deity known as Surtur there. And truth be told, I'm actually not sure why he's not in the game. He's a pretty prevalent figure who actually has a somewhat important role of Ragnarok, but we cross these bridges when we get to them. Next, and I apologize for butchering this name to hell, but I'm going to try anyway, is going to be Servoltifheim, or Nidleveer. We're going to call it Nidleveer. Anyway, this place was known as a mountainous area from what I can tell, and is where the dwarves lived. Now the reason why I say this is mountainous is because in all parts where they talk about where the dwarves live, it is simply said that they live in the mountains, in caves, or even simply under rocks. So if those are their only places to live, and I can't imagine anyone really wanting to live there, we're going to go ahead and assume this is nothing but a mountainous area. Now I'm going to mention two more places in passing as well, and those are going to be Alfenheim and Vanaheim. I keep saying Alfenheim, but there's no N in it, so it's really Alfheim, but Alfenheim. Now, Alfenheim was the home of the elves, and I'm going to go ahead and say it's assumedly a forest, as that's how a lot of people like to depict it, but it's actually never really described other than the fact of being the home of the elves, and the fact that it exists right beside Asgard, and it said that Asgard has forest around it, so forest area. And then the last place that we're going to cover, which is the last world, is Vanaheim, or the home of the Vanir. Now, the reason I bring up Vanaheim last is because I have a lot of gripes with it. There is absolutely no description of this place whatsoever. All we know about it is that it's the home of the Vanir. That's it. Apparently, no one has ever seen the place. No one has ever been to the place. It doesn't exist, even though it exists. And here's the part that I find really stupid. There was apparently a war between the Aser tribe of gods and the Vanir tribe of gods at one point. And if the Vanir were the losers, I can really imagine that someone had to have been there. I mean, you even have Freya. She never brings it up. She never says, oh, I feel homesick. Fuck you guys. Fuck you and your little descriptions of anything. I'm getting off topic. Let's move on before I bust a freaking blood cell. Or blood vein. Fuck it. Okay, now let's go over the afterlife real quick, and this is going to be pretty brief just because honestly there's only really like 4 or 5 options, 3 that are really well known, 1 that's really abstract, and the other which is kind of played with here and there. Okay, so the first 2 which I'm going to cover together are the more commonly known ones, which are Valhalla, and the one that's not so commonly known but in the same realm is Folkvang. Now, you see, these 2 realms, I bring them up together because, well, they're not really realms, they're the afterlife, but they're set in Asgard, and they're both ruled respectively by Odin and Freya. Now, the reason what brings these any sort of significance is, if you were to have died a warrior, or the gods were to have seen you as someone who's brave enough, they actually would bring you to this sort of battleground afterlife, which would be the Valhalla and Folkvang halls. Now, there's not really much information on Folkvang, but I'm not going to talk about it too much anyway, just because the only real mainly important thing about it is that it deals with Freya and Odin's relationship on how they handle the dead. So, basically, Freya actually gets first pickings of the people who die. Usually it's a large group anyway, but basically if a group gets sent towards, gets sent to the afterlife, Freya actually gets to pick she gets her first pick of the warrior. And so she basically will just be like, okay, you're cool, I want you, bye. And then she literally just sends the rest off to Odin. So there isn't really much information about Folkvang anyway, so we're just going to assume that it's something like Valhalla. So with Valhalla though, it's basically in its most TLDR description, in the mornings you fight and keep fighting, and in the evenings you rest your wounds, and then rinse and repeat. Pretty simple and explanatory. And like I said, for Folkvang, we're going to assume it's the same way, just because there isn't really too much given on it, other than the fact that we know it exists. So next, which is really the default afterlife we're going to go with, is Hell. See, while I said earlier, Hell is really just expressed in either neutral or positive terms, and the reason for that is just because with Hell, everyone goes there. But it's literally just an afterlife. You would do what you would do now there, basically just with a different backdrop. I assume it would be in 13th century, mythology. You do what you did back in 13th century time, and we'll just say, assumingly, if you were to go to Hell in nowadays, I would assume it'd be like you just having another life, just now it's eternal. So, I hope you enjoyed what you're doing. Now, these last 2 ones are really odd and somewhat abstract. Well, with the Rebirth one, it's pretty self-explanatory, but with Ran, it's not. But let me go ahead and talk about those. So, say you were to die at sea, there's actually a small chance that the giantess Ran would actually take you to what is her underwater abode. And the reason for this really isn't unclear, but I assume any motive we could probably figure out is the fact that her name roughly, or at least just translates into robber. So, maybe she's trying to steal warriors from the gods? I don't know. But we'll just go ahead and assume that she just likes you and she takes you. And then the next one is Rebirth. See, there is actually a little bit of a reincarnation cycle that is in Nordic mythology, but it's not really explicitly explained too well. But from what we do know, it's if you were to die and get reincarnated, you would actually be reincarnated as someone who is a descendant of your family line. So you'll always be in that family line that you were, but that's going to be it. There's no real, how it is with maybe other mythologies, like, for example, the Hindu and Buddhist mythologies, where, you get reincarnated based on how well you did something, or eventually get brought into karma. But we can cover that when we actually do the Hindu Pantheon video, so we're not going to worry about that. Back on point, though, we'll just go ahead and cover the prophecies, which, really, there's only one prominent prophecy, and that's the prophecy of Ragnarok. Something real prophecy that I could actually find when going over the prophecies really was just Ragnarok, and I'm not going to say that that's too odd, but considering that's the end times, I feel like that's a little bit of a cop-out. But whatever, everyone's fate is kind of tied to Ragnarok. So I'll just give you a brief synapse of Ragnarok, because I do actually want to cover Ragnarok a little bit more in depth in its own video. Ragnarok, like I said, is the end times, and the reason for this is because basically there's going to be a war between Asgard, Jotunheim, and Hel, which is the reason why I even bothered explaining them like I did. And a general kind of description of what happens, everyone dies! Who would have guessed? Now, I guess that was really hyperbole, truth be told, only because a handful of gods do actually survive, and literally 2 humans survive. And then, of course, anyone who wasn't included in the war, which was basically just animals. Except for, obviously, Finrod and Jormungand. As well as Garm. And Heidi and Skull. Okay, so there's a couple animals in there, but meh. But yeah, that really covers that. Alright guys, that's really everything I wanted to say about the Norse Pantheon, truth be told. I just wanted to give a brief overview of it, not get into anything too in-depth, as if need be, I can always do these more in-depth things in other videos, and actually give it the time that they deserve. But, considering I'm going to be doing the Gods of Smite mostly, I figured you should at least have some background on their respective mythologies. So, of course, Norse we just covered first, because this was the one I felt that I would actually be able to, not necessarily do quickly, but I already had enough background knowledge to help me out if I couldn't figure something out. Anyway, that's going to go ahead and do it for the video, though. Don't forget to leave a like, don't forget to subscribe, and if you guys will do me a favor, in the comments section, will you please let me know which Pantheon you want me to cover next? I was going to originally do an ordered list, but the way I see it, if these videos are made for you guys, then you guys should at least have a little bit of say of what I cover next. Also, once I do finish all the Pantheons, and I just start working on the God videos, please feel free to let me know if you want me to go in depth in any subject at all. Feel free to leave it in either the comments of the mythology that you want it covered, or in the last video that I did, just so that way I can keep up to date and keep track of this. And if enough people actually want to see whatever it is that people are asking for, then yeah, I'll go ahead and make a video on it. But yeah, that's going to do it, guys. Surefire, out. But babe, my palms are sweaty, my knees are weak, and my arms are heavy, and Mom's spaghetti is all over my sweater already.
So yeah, you wanna continue with that?
No, because I don't remember the rest of the lyrics.